Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. November 15th, 2021 in Hillsborough, reading from Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 29, which Prabhupada calls Rasa Dance Introduction, and we're on text 44, and this is about having a kirtan with God. Yeah. So let's imagine we come into the kirtan and Golokananda's leading the kirtan. What do you think? Huh? Oh, there you go. Yeah, so that's what we're doing today. Upagiyamana udgayan vanita shatayutapa malam bibrad vajanantim vyacharan mandayan vanam. Upagiyamanaha, being sung about. Udgayan, singing loudly himself. Vanita, of women. Shata, hundreds. Uttapaha, the commander. Malyam, the garland. Bibrat, wearing. Vaijayantim, known as Vajayanti, which consists of flowers of 5 different colors. Vyacharan, moving about. Mandayam, beautifying. Vanam, the forest. BBT translation. As the gopis sang his praises, that leader of hundreds of women sang loudly in reply. He moved among them wearing his Vajayanti garland, beautifying the Vrindavan forest. Prabhupada, the translation he gives in Krishna book, is thus the Supreme Personality of Godhead, surrounded by hundreds of gopis and decorated with a flower garland of many colors, began to wander within the Vrindavan forest, sometimes singing to himself and sometimes singing with the gopis. So that's Prabhupada's translation. BBT purport. According to Srila Jiva Goswami, Lord Krishna sang many wonderful melodies and meters, and the gopis accompanied him, following his lead. Krishna's singing on this occasion is described in the Sri Vishnu Purana. Krishna sarach chandramasam komudim komudakaram jagu gopi janastwekam Krishna nama puna puna. Krishna sang the glories of the autumn moon, the moonshine, and the lotus-filled river, while the gopis repeatedly sang his name. And again, the verse, Upagiyamana udgayan vanita shatayutapa malyam bibrad vajanantim vyacharan mandayam vanam. And we'll read again Srila Prabhupada's translation. Thus the Supreme Personality of Godhead, surrounded by hundreds of gopis and decorated with a flower garland of many colors, began to wander within the Vrindavan forest, sometimes singing to himself and sometimes singing with the gopis. So I'm going to read Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary, and this has to do with the fact that there's hundreds of gopis, and we'll get to this a little bit. Hopefully we'll be able to read a little bit from Jiva and Sanatan. So this is Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary. Radha, Chandravali, and other gopis began to sing Upagiyamana in an especially pleasing way, upa, with raga, swara, melody, and tala, beat. Now it would be really nice if we could have, arranged a whole thing with this, and Champaka could have actually danced this, and we could have sung it with the proper tala and raga. They sang the following song in ting tala, which means 3 beats. And again, I was thinking, it'd be nice if we could actually have a performance of this. So, Vadanam madhuma sadanam, chalanam dalanam kandra kirtinam, hasitam sugridir lasitam, tavasadayo patumam anisam. O dear friend, your face is the abode of sweetness. Your movements, which defeat the fame of the king of elephants, and your gentle smiles are desired by all beautiful women. Please protect me always. Krishna himself, who protects thousands of groups of gopis, the chief of whom are Radha and Chandravali, sang in the same pattern as they were singing, loudly glorifying each gopi. So the gopis were glorifying, and Krishna's glorifying each gopi. Each gopi. Sometimes they would sing back and forth in unison. As a reply to the above verse, Krishna sang, Tvad vadanam sadanam madumnam tarahata driganta vilasa tesh asavam sushamam upajagyu sunda kamakala sasalakta. Oh, beautiful one, your face is the abode. This he's speaking to each gopi. Oh, beautiful one, your face is the abode of all kinds of sweetness, and thereupon the corner of your eyes are sporting. Within those playful glances, all the skills of Cupid have come to serve you, who are both contrary and submissive. So again, because he's talking to the different groups of gopis with their different moods. The gopis sang responsively, Kante Twad Asyodaya Datam Indu, Migachala Duryasa Eva Date Jano Pahasa, Sata Nota Vakim Dvijopi Mudo Gadalam Jaghase. Oh, beloved, you hold some imperfection in your moon-like face, like the image of the deer in the moon. But what do we care for the ridicule of people in general? Although your teeth are twice born, Dvija, they are foolish because they are drinking poison. When Krishna sang the word Sunda, a gopi would reply singing the word Sundara instead of Sunda. When Krishna sang the word Kante, that means lover, Sunda means beautiful, some gopi would sing Kanta. In this way, Krishna's girlfriend sang along with him. Krishna's Vajayanti garland is made from 5 different colored flowers, since the word Vajayanti means 5 colors. Okay, I want to look at, I'm not going to read all of it, but I want to look at Sanatana Goswami. Anyway, I'm not going to read the whole thing. So Sanatana Goswami's Tika is, with the appearance of great beauty, he made Vrindavan beautiful. He wandered about in order to go to the Jamuna. They praised him by, suitable for Rati in order to stimulate the gopis' love by showing the flowers and by singing. So that's an Udipana, which we'll talk about also. They praised him by describing his form, qualities, and pastimes, or he was praised with songs on all 4 sides. So this repeating Krishna's name can mean they talked about his name, his qualities, his pastimes, or it can mean they sang from 4 sides, or it can mean all different groups of gopis. He was the protector of hundreds of groups of women, or he was the relisher of hundreds of groups of women, or he was the drinker of the nectar from the lips of hundreds of groups of women. They were in groups according to the similarity of qualities. And then Sanatana Goswami describes among the groups, he talks about the Nityasiddha devotees, the Nityasiddha gopis, and the Sadhanasiddha gopis, some who were the sages with Lord Ramachandra, and some who were with the personified Vedas. Okay, turning to Jiva Goswami, again, I'm not going to read the whole thing. So Jiva Goswami says that Krishna would sing about the moon and other objects with tunes and rhythms, and a gopi would sing about him, being absorbed completely in only him, revealing only him in the words. So Krishna would glorify the moon, and the gopis would take that and turn it around and have it be glorifying about him. So Krishna sang the glories of the autumn moon, the moonshine, and the lotus-filled river, while the gopis simply repeated his name. 2 meanings to Krishna Nam. They sang about Krishna and sang his name, or they sang his name. And in regard to the Vajayanti garland, he says, Jiva Goswami quotes 1033.5, which Sanatana Goswami also quotes, that a tumultuous sound rose from the armlets, ankle bells, and waist bells of the gopis as they sported with their beloved Krishna in the circle of the rasa dance. And then Jiva says, however, the Vajayanti garland alone is mentioned since it is suitable for forest pastimes. That garland was made by the gopis or Vrinda and offered to him. Garlands were placed in various groves for him to wear. In this manner, he wandered around. So Vrinda Devi had made garlands in advance and left them in different parts of the forest, and then as Krishna wandered around, he picked them up and put them on. So, singing with the Lord. You know, we have this idea in a lot of religions that God is just sort of passively sitting on his throne while everybody sings about him, right? God is just sitting there. Like, you know, we have stories in the Vedic times where the way the kings would wake up in the morning, they didn't have a mechanical alarm clock, that they had actual singers and musicians would come into their room and, "Oh, glorious king, you defeated your enemies, you fed people during the famine, you are wonderful, wonderful." And the king wakes up hearing his glories. Yes? And that was encouraging. Don't we all feel encouraged when somebody, isn't it? Yeah. So Krishna also has, in Vaikuntha it's certainly like that, but Krishna also likes to sing. And he likes to sing the glories of his devotees, and Krishna likes to engage in kirtan with his devotees. So I want to look at some of this described here and then think of some other examples. And then we're going to look at the setting, and then we're going to look at the gopis. So basically the performance, the setting, and the performers. The performance itself, the setting, and the performers. So the performance itself. So we have this situation where Krishna glorifies each gopi, even though there's hundreds of them. I mean, here it says hundreds, so there's actually a lot more than that. And then the gopis are glorifying Krishna. You know, this is a very common, I mean, I think I've only watched 1 or 2 Bollywood movies in my life, but I used to go to Broadway musicals when I was a kid. And it's a very common thing, right? Among the couple that's the protagonist, the man is saying, "Oh, my dear, I love you," right? Isn't that common in theater, where there's song and dance, where the man is professing his love for the woman and the woman is professing her love for the man? And then sometimes there's whole groups, right? There's whole groups of women singing, like backing up the lead lady, and there's whole groups. I'm just thinking of Sound of Music. It was like that when the young girl, 16 or something, and she meets with the young Austrian boy, and they're singing that, you know, "I love you." I don't remember the words. You know, "You love me." And so this is a very common thing, that when a man and woman are in love with each other, they sing to each other. So Krishna is also doing that. This comes, Prabhupada says this is called the Adi Rasa, that the reason that there's love between men and women in this world is this exists between Krishna and the gopis, or Krishna and the queens. I'm sure Krishna sings love songs to Satyabhama and Jambavati and Rukmini and so forth also. Yes, serenading each other out in the gardens. So that's what's happening here. And there's so much, you know, one of the 26 qualities of a devotee is poetic. And these great devotees can make poetry right on the spot. You know, there was that Keshava Kashmiri, who was able to speak 100 verses glorifying the Ganges, just to speak it spontaneously. You know, most of us, we want to write poetry, we have to write it, and we have to kind of think about it, and, you know, maybe we have to go to rhyme.com and look up our words, you know, synonym.com or whatever, to write our poetry. But they just spontaneously speak poetry with all the poetic ornaments. Actually, I'm listening to, Bir Krishna Swami has an audiobook of the Ananda Vrindavan Champu, and where I am right now is in the Rasa dance. And Kavi Karnapur is describing various aspects of the Rasa dance, comparing them to poetry. You know, just like poetry has this particular ornament, so there was this particular action in the Rasa dance. So the dance itself was physical poetry. And we also see this in good dancing, isn't it? That dancing looks like poetry in motion. And of course, music is kind of the ultimate, music and dancing is kind of the ultimate expression of poetry, where you have the rhythm and the meter, and you have all of the assonance and the consonants and the personification, and right? Isn't that all of the different ornaments are in the song? So they can do this spontaneously. Right, when Krishna dances on Kali, it says he's the master of all fine arts, such as dancing, but one of them is poetry. And so Krishna's, you know, he's glorifying each gopi. Oh, your face is like this, you dance like this, your eyes are like this. And they take the same points and the same meter and the same rhythm and a lot of the same words and change the form a little bit so that it's about him. And they do that like this. And they can do it instantly back and forth. And sometimes they're doing it at the same time. Like we've heard choral singing like that, isn't it? Where people are singing something a little different or singing what we call a musical round. And yes? You've all heard that? And it blends. Some of you may remember Badarayan and Rukmini, who used to live here. So she made a recording like that I used in one of my UNC classes of English translation of Bhagavad Gita 9:26, Patra Pushpam Palam Toyam, where she made it as a rhyme. And then she also made it as a choral round with different people singing different parts at the same time. So the gopis are doing this, and hundreds or thousands are doing this together. I may have mentioned this before. I read an amazing near-death experience from a Christian minister who was in a fatal car accident and pronounced dead for like an hour and a half at the scene of the accident. And he said he went to a higher realm where everyone was glorifying God in song. And he said there were thousands and thousands of voices, each singing their own song, and you could make out each individual song, and yet all the thousands of voices were in perfect harmony. I would really doubt that he went to Goloka Vrindavan in his near-death experience. So whatever he experienced, we could magnify that by many millions and millions and millions of times, what kind of musical singing they're doing. And Krishna is also doing this, singing about the forest. So sometimes he's singing about the gopis and they're responding. Other time he's saying, the moon is like this, the trees are like this, the Yamuna is like this. And the gopis turn it around. Oh, well, it's the moon of your face. And someone might say you have some fault for dancing with us in the middle of the night. But that's not to be taken into consideration with the beauty of the moon. So they turn all of his descriptions of the Vrindavan forest to be about him. So I was thinking about other instances where the Lord is having this singing with his devotees. So can any of you think of other instances in Shastra? Yes, Kamalini. Oh, yeah, the cowherd boys. They also are singing, and they're praising each other singing. Oh, my dear friends, you are dancing and singing very nicely. And they dance with each other, and sometimes just Krishna's dancing. Sometimes Krishna dances with the peacocks. Shiva Ram Swami talks about Krishna's peacock dance. He said it's kind of a funky dance if you're doing a peacock dance. Yes, Dayavir Prabhu. Yes. Yeah, okay, so Dayavir Prabhu was saying how Gopal Champu, the devotees are all singing with Krishna. Krishna has a baton. He has a stick. He's spinning that stick like a baton, and they're having this parade. Imagine that, like we saw the dance that Champaka and her troupe did from Gopal Champu, where they asked, who is worshipped Govardhan Hill? Oh, the killer of Agasura, and like that. But imagine we were circumambulating Govardhan Hill with Krishna, having this kirtan with Krishna, going around Govardhan Hill. Any other instances? Yes. Lord Chaitanya. So every night, and actually, if you look at the descriptions of the eightfold pastimes, the Astakalila Leelas, there's also descriptions of corresponding Astakalila Leelas of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And his evening kirtans at Srivas Thakur's house are the same time of the day as Krishna's Raslila. And so there, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is having a kirtan with the devotees. And just like this Raslila is a very private pastime, this is not a pastime where all the inhabitants of Vrindavan are there. So the pastimes at Srivas Thakur's house is also very private. And a few weeks ago, Mars was talking about that, right? The mother-in-law hiding in the pot. So they were having these. Imagine Mahaprabhu's leading the kirtan, or even responding in the kirtan. I'm just thinking about how when we were seeing Srila Prabhupada off at the airport in New York in 1975, we were in the VIP lounge, which was under construction, so we were the only ones in the lounge. And Srila Prabhupada was sitting on a sofa, and he asked for kirtan. So I was sitting about as close to Srila Prabhupada as like the other end of that table. And Prabhupada asked someone else to lead the kirtan. So my godbrother Jai Sachinandan led the kirtan. And he was singing Guru Vastika and then Guru Vandana. And Srila Prabhupada was responding with all the other devotees. And I was meditating on how Srila Prabhupada was singing to his guru, to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And I was sitting, maybe half a meter away from him. And Prabhupada had his head down with his eyes closed, and he was playing kartals very quietly. And being in that kirtan, I don't know what everybody else's experience was, but I wasn't in New York anymore. I wasn't in the airport. I was in the spiritual world, being in that kirtan where Prabhupada was responding in the kirtan. So there with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, sometimes he's leading the kirtan, sometimes he's responding. And of course, Mahaprabhu is in the kirtans at Rath Yatra with everybody, for the public. So he has these kirtans with Srivas Thakur in a private house, and then he has these kirtans at Rath Yatra, where he's even expanding. He's in everybody's kirtan party, like Krishna expands with each group of gopis. Yeah, and then, of course, there was the kirtan of the civil disobedience against the house of the Qazi, and Mahaprabhu would regularly perform public kirtans. Again, imagine that. Imagine you're out on Harinam, and then Mahaprabhu shows up and, takes the kartals and starts leading the kirtan. And how do you know? Maybe sometimes he's there responding. And I was thinking of another incarnation besides Krishna and Lord Chaitanya. Anybody think of another incarnation? Mohini. I don't know if there was any kirtan with Mohini. Oh. I was thinking about Varaha in 3:13:26. So when Varaha appears out of the nostril of Lord Brahma, and he's getting bigger and bigger and bigger in the sky, the sages are singing his glories, and what does he do? He roars in response. I've been in a kirtan at New Vrajdam where there was roaring. And sometimes that's actually one of the anubhavs, one of the expressions of ecstasy, roaring in a kirtan. So anyway, with Lord Varaha, that was a real cosmic kirtan. Lord Varaha's in the sky, and the sages are singing, and he's roaring in response. This was going, so that's 3:13:26. So that's the performance, and then there's the setting for the performance. So the setting is also important, yes? Yes, when I was an undergrad, I was, most of my friends, when I was in high school, they were also in the debating club, became lawyers. But the main thing I learned from being in the debating club is you cannot establish truth through debate. So I decided that becoming a lawyer was becoming a cheater. You won the case if you were the best at debate, never mind truth. So I thought, well, what am I going to do with my skills? And I thought, well, maybe I'll go into acting. So I was studying, as an undergrad, I was studying drama, and one of the classes I took was in set design and light. I took a class in lighting and sound and that kind of thing. So that's also very important, right, when you're setting up the stage. One of the nicest things we had in the old 55th Street Temple was we had a professional theater. We have that in Bhaktivedanta Manor too. Professional stage, and you can have the different props come down and like that, and what kind of costumes you have. And like we have our stage in the hall. At some point, please, Krishna will actually be able to set up a more professional stage there, or we can dance in front of the deities in the beautiful temple room. So what's the setting for this musical performance? We have in the verse itself. Oh, this is the next one. Can we go back up to today's verse? Forest, Vanam. It's in the forest. The Yamuna, yes. And as Krishna's going through the forest, so this is deep into the forest. These are areas where most of the residents of Vrindavan don't go. You know, this was explained previously when Krishna and the gopis were arguing, when Krishna was telling them, you have to go home. You're in the deep forest, and I forget which of the Acharyas Tika was saying that Krishna really meant, we're in such a deep part of the forest that your family will not be able to find you here. You know, externally he was saying, we're in the deep forest, you better go home to your family. Your family will be worried about you. They won't be able to find you, and they'll be worried. And then what Krishna was actually saying, we're in such a deep part of the forest that don't worry, your family won't be able to find you here. So within the deep forest, there's many different groves and many different forests. Right? There's descriptions in Ananda Vrindavan Champu and a lot of the other Goswami literatures that there's 6 seasonal forests. You know, here we have 4 seasons, but in India they have 6. And in the spiritual world, there's 6 seasonal forests. They're always in that season. So you can go into the spring forest, the summer forest, the monsoon forest, the early winter forest, the foggy forest, and what have I forgotten? Forgot one of them. Did I say that? Summer? And then there's certain pastimes they like to perform in certain forests. Like in the monsoon forest, they like to swing. It dissipates the heat and humidity. In the summer forest, they have water pastimes. In the winter forest, Vrinda Devi brings warm clothes of crimson and brown, and there's a lot of incense burning, and there's different pastimes that go on in the different forests, and then there's also a forest of all the 6 seasons together. And in each of these forests, there's different kinds of flowers. Just like if we were to plant a garden here that would have something of interest all year. So like early in the winter, you'd have the daffodils come up, right? And the hyacinths, and then you get it. As the seasons change, different things would bloom. And in the winter, you'd have things that were evergreen and evergreens that have some color, isn't it? Right? So an expert landscaper, they can make a garden that every season it changes and produces different kinds of flowers, different kinds of vegetation. So in each forest, there's different sorts of flowers and vegetations and different ornaments that the gopis wear. And then in the 6 seasonal forests, they're all there together. And then, of course, there's the forest organized by 12 forests. Right, the 12 forests of like Kalapvan and Bahubharvan and things like that. So it's explained that as Krishna goes through these different forests with the gopis, Vrinda Devi and her assistants have prepared in advance all these different accoutrements. So as they come to different forests and different groves, then Krishna puts on a different garland of the flowers from that forest and different jewelry, and he's served in different ways, and they have somewhat different songs that are being sung there about that particular place. Yes, and it's also described that some of the gopis were making garlands on the spot. We had to do that once in Sao Paulo, where we had all these dignitaries come, and nobody had arranged enough garlands for everybody in advance. And so we were running around the temple property, quickly picking all the flowers and engaging everybody to make garlands on the spot, giving it to all the house. Quite an adventure. So the gopis were also doing that. They were making garlands on the spot and giving it to Krishna. So these are the udipanas, as Jiva Goswami is saying, the stimulants. And in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, in the Krishna Southern Ocean, first wave, where he's talking about the vibhava, in the last part about udipana, one of the things he mentions are the garlands. So there's Vajayanti garlands mentioned here, which have how many different colors? Anybody remember? 5. And how long are they? Does anybody know? Knees or feet. So they're really long garlands. Could you imagine dancing, wearing a garland all the way to your feet? That's what Krishna's doing. He's dancing and singing and wandering. Dancing, singing, wandering around with this garland to his feet. The other kinds of garlands are just over the chest, just hanging around the neck. So short around the neck, hanging down to this is kind of neither. And a chaplet around his top knot. And then Krishna has garlands made of flowers, made of jewels. And then among the flowers, he has garlands made of cultivated flowers and garlands made of wild forest flowers. So these are the different kinds of garlands that Krishna is wearing. And each of these garlands is a stimulus for love. And again, the different garlands are related to these different places that he's going through. And each of these places they're wandering in the forest is also stimulating love. So there keeps being like new magic unfold. They're wandering to this forest and this grove in this forest. And you know, some of the groves have crystal trees with ruby platforms, and some have ruby trees with crystal platforms. And as the gopis are singing, the platforms melt, and then they reform into other shapes. And all of these, just like in this world, you know, if you're singing in a different way, that water will form different patterns. You've seen this? Like they have water on like a drum surface and someone sings and it makes different patterns. So they're actually, the stones change patterns and the trees change patterns. Or when I was a teenager, we used to have these like stupid disco balls or things, right? You remember that? Where you play certain music and the colors change? Remember that? My brother-in-law had a whole bunch of these. You know, you play different music and it pulsates with different colors and different, I forget what they were called, different liquids making different designs, you know, they're really chintzy looking things. But if you, in the spiritual world, that's actually happening with the trees and the stones and different jewels and different fruits and flowers, and certain kinds of songs are going to cause certain flowers to bloom and other songs cause other flowers to bloom. And then Krishna's singing about these things happening. So they're singing certain songs which are causing these things in the environment, and then the things that are in the environment are stimulating different songs that Krishna's singing. Then the gopis are taking these songs that Krishna's singing, and they're turning them around and making them about him. And then, of course, there's the actors, there's the performers. So there's Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who can expand everywhere and be in every place at every time and have this perfect individual relationship with each of the gopis and simultaneously hear us crying here on the earth planet. Oh, Krishna. Like yesterday, Jagatguru was supposed to fix something on my computer, and instead he fully and completely broke my computer. Fully and completely broke my computer. And I'm sitting there going, my dear Lord, I really need my computer. I can understand if you want to take it away, but I really need, please, can you please figure it out, please? And finally, after like 3 hours, we found some hacker online who had a solution, and it was fixed. Like, thank you, Krishna. So Krishna can hear this silly little prayer of Urmila on the earth planet in Kali Yuga while he's going through all these forests of Vrindavan, right? He can hear all of our little, you know, my Aunt Sue's in the hospital, dear Lord, or whatever, you know. So that's our main performer. And then among the gopis, so there's different groups. Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur mentioned the chief gopis, Radharani and Chandravali, but there's also many, many other gopi leaders. There's 4 main types of groups of gopis. And so there's Radha's own group. There's groups that are friendly to her, like Shamala's groups. There's groups that are neutral to her, like Bhadra's groups. And then there are groups that are apparently antagonistic, like Chandravali's groups. Also, the groups could be understood geographically, like where they were standing in relation to Krishna. This was also brought out by our acharyas when we discussed the arguments back and forth between the gopis and Krishna, that there were 4 main groups, even geographically, standing in the directions. And these groups can also be, as Sanatana Goswami explains, I think it was Sanatana Goswami, about the Nityasiddhas and the Sadhanasiddha devotees. So you have the Nityasiddha gopis who come with Krishna in every universe, and then you have the Sadhanasiddha devotees, those who were sages with Ramachandra, those who were the personification of the scriptures. I do find it interesting that the personification of the scriptures are all female. And then, of course, you have all the various Sadhanasiddha devotees, like hopefully all of us. I was just reading this conversation Prabhupada had with Allen Ginsberg, and he said, after 10,000 years, all of my disciples will be with Krishna. And this morning I was just hearing Prabhupada explain, he said, just like Krishna's pastimes are going on in each universe, he said, like now it's 8:30, and then it's 8:30 someplace else, 8:30 someplace else. He says, so we are opening this Krishna Balaram temple here, but you should know that in another universe, tomorrow there'll be another opening of the Krishna Balaram temple. And he said, wherever we establish the temple, there is Vrindavan. He said, just like a president, wherever he goes, a king, a rich person, their home goes with them. You know, when our President Biden travels someplace, so he has a whole entourage that sets everything up for him as if he were in the White House, isn't it? Yes, has to be. Said, so wherever Krishna comes, everything is set up as the spiritual world. And that is also true here. So this is also, we call it New Goloka. That's not just some name we put on it. It actually becomes the spiritual world. You know, in New Vrajdam, they've set up the property so that there's a replica of Govardhan and a replica of the Jamuna. And Shiva Ramaswamy would say, he said, Radha Shyamasundar are walking around the property. So just like, you know, Bir Krishna Swami, Leela Shakti, they walk around and inspect the property. Please, you know, be assured that Radha Golokananda and Govardhan, they're not just hanging out on the altar. They're also walking around the property. You know, oh, look at the flowers over here. Oh, look at this bench over here. Oh, just see how the devotees are cooking for me in the kitchen. And as they're walking around, they're singing the glories of the devotees. So it's not just that we're singing their glories. They're also singing the glories of the devotees. They're singing the glories of the atmosphere. And if we enter into that, then we will always be in a kirtan with the Lord. So thank you very much. By the way, I'm going to be traveling, so I won't be here for 3 Mondays. Thank you very much for facilitating me. I don't know if we have time. We try. Yes? You want to try? Definitely. Imagine being a little flower in the Vrindavan forest, and Krishna comes and sings about you. And yes, just imagine Vrinda Devi and her assistants who planted that flower there and who asked the flower, now as soon as Krishna comes by here, you need to bloom. Just at this point in the song, that's when you need to bloom. And then Krishna notices and he sings about the flower, and then Vrinda and his assistants are all in ecstasy, and the flowers are all in ecstasy. Yes, exactly. Prabhupada said we should be captivated by this information and want to go to the spiritual kingdom. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.